The first thing that changed wasn't my face, it was the way the mirror suddenly refused to look away from me. I stood there longer than I meant to, makeup brush paused midair, heart thudding like I'd crossed some invisible line without permission. The room felt charged, quieter than silence, as if it were waiting to see whether I'd finish what I'd started or retreat back into familiarity. I told myself this was nothing, just curiosity, just an experiment I'd wash off before it could mean anything. But even then, a part of me knew that mirrors remember things long after water tries to erase them. It had started innocently enough. A free afternoon. A house to myself. A small bag I'd borrowed under the pretense of practicality, not longing. I laid everything out on the desk with unnecessary precision, as if order might keep the moment under control. The colors looked brighter than they had any right to be, lined up like possibilities I hadn't agreed to consider. I caught my reflection before I began, bare-faced, guarded, familiar, and gave myself a look that said don't make this complicated. The first touch was awkward. The brush felt foreign in my hand, too soft to be taken seriously, and I almost laughed at how carefully I breathed. My reflection changed in increments so small they felt deniable at first. A subtle shift here. A gentler line there. Nothing dramatic. And yet, with every movement, something inside me loosened, like a knot I hadn't realized I'd been tightening for years. I leaned closer to the mirror, searching for the moment I'd regret this. It didn't arrive. Instead, I felt a strange calm settle in, paired with a flicker of fear sharp enough to keep me honest. This wasn't about looking different, not really. It was about seeing myself without flinching, and realizing how rarely I'd allowed that before. The brush hovered again, waiting for my decision, and I understood that whatever happened next wouldn't stay confined to this room. I told myself I would stop after one small step, but the mirror had already learned how to ask for more without speaking. I adjusted the light, angling it carefully, and noticed how my expression had softened without instruction. There was concentration there, yes, but also a tenderness I didn't remember practicing. My hands steadied as I went on, the motions becoming less deliberate and more intuitive, like my body recognized the ritual before my mind did. With every subtle change, my face felt less like a surface and more like a story unfolding. I wasn't trying to hide anything. If anything, I was revealing things I'd kept tucked away behind habits and expectations. I caught myself smiling, just a hint, and the sight startled me enough that I paused, heart racing. That smile felt earned, and that frightened me more than if I'd felt foolish. I stepped back and really looked. Not for flaws. Not for mistakes. Just to see. The person in the mirror didn't look like a stranger, but they didn't look like the version of me I showed the world either. They existed somewhere in between, balanced on a line I'd never allowed myself to walk before. The realization brought a rush of warmth followed immediately by doubt. What did it mean if this felt right? What did it mean if I didn't want to rush to undo it? A sound outside, a passing car, a distant voice, snapped me back, reminding me that this moment existed inside a larger world with opinions and rules and consequences. The fear returned, sharp but clarifying. I wiped my hands on a towel, grounding myself, and took a breath that felt deeper than usual. The mirror didn't change, but I did. I straightened, met my own eyes, and felt the weight of a quiet truth settling in. I wasn't just trying makeup. I was trying honesty, and I wasn't sure I could pretend I hadn't once it began to fit. I moved closer to the mirror again, close enough to see the smallest details, the way my lashes cast faint shadows, the way my eyes seemed brighter simply because I was finally paying attention to them. I'd spent years avoiding this kind of scrutiny, convinced that looking too closely would invite judgment. Instead, what I felt was recognition. Not total, not complete, but enough to make my chest tighten with something that felt dangerously like relief. I remembered all the times I'd rushed past mirrors without really seeing myself, treating reflections like obstacles instead of invitations. Now, standing still, I felt exposed in a new way. Not exposed as in vulnerable to others, but vulnerable to myself. There was nowhere to hide from the realization that I liked what I saw, not because it was perfect, but because it felt sincere. Doubt crept in quietly, carrying familiar questions. Was this allowed? Was I borrowing something that wasn't mine to touch? I tried to summon shame, expecting it to arrive on schedule, but it hesitated, uncertain, like it no longer knew its cue. In its place came a careful pride, fragile but real, and I held it the way you hold something breakable, aware that dropping it would hurt. I stepped away from the mirror and walked around the room, needing to feel my body move, to remind myself I was still grounded. The makeup didn't feel like a mask. It felt like punctuation, adding emphasis to feelings I'd been editing out for years. When I caught my reflection in the darkened window, layered over the outside world, I felt a quiet thrill, and immediately after, a stab of fear at how quickly that thrill had arrived. I returned to the mirror once more, knowing I was already past the point of pretending this was insignificant. Whatever I was seeing now had shifted something fundamental, and I sensed that the real challenge wouldn't be washing it off. It would be deciding what to do with the way it had taught me to look. I told myself I should take it off now, end on a controlled note, but the idea felt abrupt, like slamming a book shut mid-sentence. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the moment breathe. The mirror stayed in my line of sight, not demanding attention, just present, like it trusted me to come back when I was ready. That trust felt new, and oddly emotional. I hadn't realized how often I'd treated myself like someone who needed constant supervision. I picked up my phone without unlocking it, just feeling its weight in my hand, imagining for a fleeting second what it would be like to capture this version of me. The thought sent a jolt of panic through my chest, followed immediately by a sense of loss at how quickly I dismissed it. I wasn't ready for proof. Proof turns moments into statements, and I was still learning the language of what this meant. I set the phone down and focused instead on how my face felt, lighter somehow, less rigid. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. Being younger, watching someone apply makeup with practiced ease, fascinated not by the result but by the care in the process. The patience, the permission to linger. I'd forgotten how much I'd wanted that softness for myself, how early I'd learned to file that want away under "not for you." Sitting there now, I felt a quiet grief for all the moments I'd rushed through my own reflection, afraid of wanting too much. The mirror caught my eyes again, and this time I didn't look away. I nodded, just once, like acknowledging a shared understanding. Whatever this was, it wasn't a phase that needed to be explained or defended. It was an experience, and experiences leave marks whether we name them or not. I took a slow breath, feeling both heavier and freer, and stood back up, knowing the hardest part was no longer what I'd put on my face, but what I'd allowed myself to see. I finally stood and walked back to the mirror, this time without rehearsing what I might feel. The room seemed smaller now, more intimate, like it had leaned in to listen. I tilted my head, watching how the light shifted across my face, and noticed something unexpected. My expression had changed its resting place. My brows weren't tense. My jaw wasn't locked. It felt like I'd been holding my breath for years and had only just realized it. That realization scared me. Relief can be unsettling when you're not used to it. I pressed my palms against the edge of the dresser, grounding myself, reminding my body that I was still here, still me. And yet, the mirror insisted on showing me a version of myself that felt more present than usual, like I'd stepped into focus after living slightly blurred. I wondered how many people walked around never quite meeting their own eyes, and whether they knew what they were missing. A wave of doubt followed close behind. What would I think of this later? Tomorrow? Would I cringe at my own vulnerability, wish I'd never opened this door? The questions piled up, familiar and heavy, but they didn't land the way they used to. Instead of pushing me backward, they made me pause, reflective rather than reactive. That alone felt like progress. I reached up and traced the line of my cheekbone lightly, not to check the makeup, but to confirm what I was seeing. The touch was careful, almost reverent. In the mirror, that small gesture looked like kindness, and the sight of it caught me off guard. I realized how rarely I treated myself that way. For the first time since I'd started, I smiled fully. It wasn't dramatic or triumphant, just quiet and real. And in that smile, I felt both pride and fear coexist, balanced in a way that made me think this wasn't about choosing one identity over another. It was about allowing more than one truth to exist at the same time. The sound of my phone vibrating on the bed shattered the quiet, and my heart jumped like I'd been caught doing something forbidden. For a second, I didn't move. I just stared at my reflection, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt, even though I was alone. The mirror, once gentle, now felt like a witness. I turned away from it before checking the screen, as if the device itself might judge me. It was a group message, friends joking about something trivial, plans for the weekend, the usual rhythm of a life I knew how to perform in. I typed a response, erased it, then typed something safer, something that fit the version of me they expected. When I hit send, a strange heaviness settled in my chest. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was the feeling of leaving part of myself out of the conversation, like editing a sentence until it no longer said what I meant. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the phone rest face down beside me. My hands were still slightly unsteady. I looked back at the mirror from a distance this time, seeing not just my face but my posture, the way my shoulders curved inward as if to protect something fragile. That was when it hit me. This wasn't just about makeup or appearance. It was about permission. The permission I'd never asked for and never been given. A memory surfaced, uninvited but vivid, standing in front of a mirror as a kid, trying on a costume meant for someone else, feeling both thrilled and ashamed at the same time. I remembered how quickly I'd learned to laugh it off, to say it was a joke before anyone else could decide it wasn't. That reflex was still there, alive and ready, but now I could see it for what it was, a shield I didn't always need. I stood again, straighter this time, and met my own gaze. The mirror reflected someone quieter but stronger, someone learning to stay instead of retreat. I didn't know what I would do with this feeling yet, or who I would ever share it with. But as I breathed in and out, slowly, deliberately, I understood that something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't just seeing myself differently, I was allowing myself to be seen, even if only by me, and that felt like the beginning of something I couldn't unlearn. Night crept in so quietly I barely noticed it at first, the room darkening in shades rather than steps. The mirror now reflected softer edges, lamplight smoothing everything into something almost cinematic. I felt suspended between moments, like if I moved too fast I'd break whatever spell had settled over me. I reached for a sweater and pulled it on, not to hide, but to feel anchored, like layering warmth over a fragile truth. As I paced the room, my thoughts grew louder. What would it mean if this wasn't a one-time experiment? The idea thrilled me and terrified me in equal measure. I imagined future versions of myself, some retreating back into familiar patterns, others stepping forward with a confidence I wasn't sure I deserved. The mirror followed me with its quiet insistence, always there when I glanced back, asking the same question without words. Which one will you choose? I caught my reflection again and noticed how natural it felt now, how the initial shock had faded into something steadier. The recurring object, the mirror, had changed roles. It was no longer a test or a dare. It felt like a checkpoint, a place where I could pause and tell the truth, even if I wasn't ready to act on it yet. That realization softened something inside me, easing a tension I hadn't known how to name. Then doubt surged back, sharp and familiar. What if people laughed? What if they didn't understand? The fears lined up neatly, rehearsed over years of self-protection. I let them pass through me without answering, the way you let traffic noise fade when you stop listening for it. For once, the fears didn't get the final word. They were just thoughts, not commands. I sat back down, exhaled slowly, and felt a quiet pride bloom, not the loud kind that demands applause, but the private kind that grows when you stay with yourself through discomfort. Whatever came next, I knew I'd crossed an invisible line. I couldn't unsee what the mirror had shown me tonight, and a part of me didn't want to. I didn't take the makeup off right away. That choice felt important, even rebellious in a quiet, almost invisible way. Instead, I turned the lights down further and let the room exist in half shadow, as if I needed the world to soften before I could move forward. The mirror still caught me in fragments. An eye here, a smile there, and each fragment felt honest in a way I wasn't used to. I picked up my phone again, this time not because it demanded my attention, but because I wanted to see myself through another lens. The camera opened, and suddenly there I was, flattened into pixels, framed and unfamiliar. I adjusted the angle, then stopped. My finger hovered over the screen. This was the photo, the one that felt dangerous. The one that could cross boundaries I'd spent years carefully maintaining. My heart thudded loudly in my ears, like it was trying to talk me out of something. I took the picture anyway. Just one. The click sounded louder than it should have, final and undeniable. When the image appeared, I studied it closely, searching for flaws, excuses, reasons to dismiss it. But what I saw wasn't shocking or dramatic. It was calm. It was me, looking back with a softness I didn't usually allow myself. That calmness unsettled me more than anything else could have. Almost without thinking, I opened my social feed. My thumb scrolled past other people's carefully curated lives, their confidence worn like a second skin. For a moment, I imagined joining them, imagined what it would feel like to be seen without explanation or apology. Then reality rushed in. Family, friends, expectations, all the invisible threads pulling me back into place. I closed the app, my pulse still racing, and locked the phone. The mirror caught me again as I stood there, phone in hand, decision unresolved. It reflected not a failure of courage, but a pause, an in-between moment where growth quietly happens. I realized that deleting the photo didn't erase what I'd felt while taking it. That feeling was still mine, tucked safely inside me, waiting. And maybe that was enough for now. I finally washed my face at the sink, watching the colors fade with each splash of water. The process was slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. As the makeup disappeared, I expected to feel loss or regret, but what surprised me was the steadiness that replaced it. The mirror showed my familiar face returning, yet something subtle remained, an echo of the confidence I'd seen earlier, lingering behind my eyes. Drying my face, I caught myself standing a little taller than usual. The gesture felt unearned, like I hadn't done anything to deserve it, but it stayed anyway. I realized then that the transformation hadn't been undone with soap and water. It had shifted inward, rearranging something quiet but permanent. The mirror, once again, had done its work, not by changing what I saw, but by changing how I looked. As I cleaned up the room, putting things back where they belonged, I noticed how gentle my movements were. Every brush placed away, every towel folded, felt like closing a chapter with care rather than shame. The recurring object, the mirror, now felt less like a judge and more like an archive, holding versions of me that could coexist without conflict. That thought eased a long-held fear I hadn't realized I was carrying. Lying on the bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replayed the evening in quiet flashes. None of it felt dramatic in retrospect, yet it all felt important. I thought about how many times I'd dismissed moments like this as fleeting or meaningless. This time, I let it matter. I let myself believe that small, private choices could still shape a life. Sleep crept closer, heavy and comforting. Just before my eyes closed, I promised myself something simple. I wouldn't pretend this night hadn't happened. Whatever the future held, I would carry this understanding with me, like a secret compass pointing me gently toward honesty. And that promise, whispered in the dark, felt like the most courageous thing I'd done all day. Morning light found me before my alarm did, slipping through the curtains in pale bands that felt almost curious. For a split second, disoriented and half asleep, I wondered if the night before had been a dream. Then I caught my reflection in the darkened screen of my phone, and something in my chest warmed. The memory settled back into place, not loud, not demanding, just present. As I got ready for the day, everything felt slightly altered, like the world had shifted its center by a few degrees. Pulling on my usual clothes felt different, not restrictive, just incomplete, as if I now knew there were other ways to exist that I hadn't acknowledged before. The mirror watched quietly as I adjusted my collar, and I noticed I wasn't bracing myself the way I usually did. I looked, nodded once, and moved on. On my way out, I paused by the mirror again, almost unconsciously. It had become a ritual in less than 24 hours. This time, it didn't show me transformation or revelation, it showed continuity. The same person, carrying a new layer of understanding beneath the surface. That felt grounding, reassuring. I wasn't abandoning anything. I was expanding. Throughout the day, ordinary interactions carried a new undercurrent. Conversations felt louder, smiles more intentional. I wondered how many people around me were carrying their own unspoken truths, how many mirrors they avoided or returned to in private. The thought made me feel less alone, connected in a quiet, invisible way. By the time evening approached, I felt a gentle anticipation rather than fear. Not because I planned to repeat the experience right away, but because I knew I could. The door was no longer sealed shut. It was simply there, waiting, and the knowledge of that choice filled me with a calm I hadn't expected. That evening, as the house settled into its familiar hush, I found myself drawn back to my room with a sense of purpose I didn't quite recognize yet. The mirror waited where it always had, unchanged and patient. I stood in front of it, not to alter anything this time, but to check in, to see if the connection I'd felt the night before was still there. It was quieter now, but steady. I thought about the photo I'd taken and never posted. The one still tucked away on my phone, unseen by anyone else. Instead of feeling like a secret, it felt like a marker, proof that the moment had been real. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Knowing it existed was enough, like a letter I'd written to myself and sealed for the future. A wave of emotion rose unexpectedly. Gratitude, of all things. Gratitude for curiosity, for courage, for the mirror that had reflected more than just a face. I rested my hand against the glass again, the same gesture from the night before, and felt a quiet pride settle in. Not pride in appearance, but in honesty. For the first time, I considered what it might mean to share this part of myself someday. Not with everyone, not all at once, but carefully, intentionally. The thought still carried fear, but it no longer felt impossible. The mirror reflected someone learning to stand with uncertainty rather than run from it, and that felt like growth in its purest form. As I stepped back, I understood that this wasn't an ending or a dramatic reveal. It was a beginning made of small, deliberate choices. The mirror, my silent companion through it all, had transformed from an object into a symbol, a place where I could return whenever I needed to remember who I was becoming. A few days later, I stood in front of the mirror one last time before leaving the house, the morning humming with ordinary urgency. Nothing about the scene looked remarkable. Same room, same light, same familiar face, but I felt the difference immediately. The mirror no longer felt like a threshold I had to cross or a secret I had to guard. It felt like a quiet witness to growth, the kind that doesn't announce itself but changes everything anyway. I realized then that the transformation hadn't been about becoming someone else. It had been about allowing myself to notice what was already there, patiently waiting. The fear of rejection hadn't vanished, but it had softened, edged now with something sturdier, self-trust. I knew there would be days I'd doubt myself again, days I'd retreat into old habits. But I also knew the mirror would still be there, holding the truth without judgment. As I turned away, I felt a calm resolve settle in. I didn't need to post the photo or explain myself to the world. This journey didn't require an audience. What mattered was that I'd seen myself clearly, maybe for the first time, and chosen not to look away. That choice echoed quietly inside me, steady and reassuring. Walking out the door, I carried that understanding with me.